so grateful to you, Mark, to be here tonight and to be welcoming people over Zoom. And just a couple of, housekeeping things, especially Adi has asked me to share with people is we're going to be concluding promptly by 6:30 Pacific time, maybe a few minutes early. We'll see how it goes. And we're also going to have an opportunity for Q&A in the last part of our time together tonight. So if you have a question that you want to put in the chat, Adi will help us with that. I can't see the chat so clearly from where I'm sitting, but Adi will help us. We just want to ask that people put their first and last name in the chat and tell us where you're from and how you're joining us tonight, maybe what community you're a part of, if any, or how you found your way to Kol Shofar tonight with Mark and with me. And, just reflecting on, this is the first of a series of 4 virtual fireside chats that I'll be having as part of marking this moment of 10 years of being a part of the Kol Shofar community. And as this time with this amazing community comes to a close, what a great gift for me to be able to reflect with amazing leaders and rabbis and people whom I feel so close to and have shared so much with. And Mark, it's so fitting that you are the first person that we're doing this with. I'm doing this with tonight. So Mark, I would love for you to share a little bit more about IJS to start, because I don't want to make any assumptions tonight that everyone here knows all about IJS and all the amazing things that IJS does, and then we can get into the nitty-gritty together.
Fantastic. I mean, I want to first of all just say hi to everyone, and thank you, Susan, for this. I feel this really feels like an honor. Really, it's both an honor and a real pleasure to get to do this. And I want to say kol hakavod to you for for what you have done and accomplished over 10 years at Kol Shofar. And one day, hopefully, get to be in that sanctuary with all of you and experience it myself. I've only seen pictures and it looks so beautiful. So I'm looking forward to that one day. So as Susan said, I work at the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, which is my connection with Susan. And I have been involved with IJS not from its inception, but from the beginning of its programming, which is about 21 years ago. And just the nutshell version of this is that originally the idea for IJS was to create an organization that would help rabbis, specifically rabbis, help them rediscover the spiritual spark that originally drew them to becoming a rabbi, kind of rediscover their calling or the spiritual or soul aspect of that calling. And the theory of change was that if we could help rabbis do so, if they could reconnect and come back to their what originally inspired them to become rabbis and to attend to their own spirit and their own soul, that would kind of ripple out in the communities that they serve. That was the theory of change. And gradually that theory kind of began to expand to include other Jewish professionals and clergy like cantors and educators, and then expanded further to include lay people who might be partners, who would be partners with those clergy. In fact, one of those folks is on tonight, Larry Yermak. Really nice to see Larry, who participated in a program we had called Kivun, which was specifically to do that, just to basically give lay leaders a similar experience to what clergy were getting in the program. And the essential bread and butter program, which continues to this day, is an 18-month immersive program that includes 4 retreats over 18 months, 4 5-day retreats with intensive study and spiritual practice in between those retreats. And that's been going on. And I actually was fortunate to be one of the member of the first cohort of rabbis who participated, including your rabbi then, Rabbi Leider, who was part of that same cohort. So I feel like I've had some connection to Kol Shofar all the way back the last two decades plus. So fast forward, IJS's mission and vision have really expanded beyond working exclusively with Jewish clergy. Some of you folks avail yourselves of a lot of opportunities, especially with the pandemic. We offer a tremendous number of resources, including a weekday meditation that takes place at 9:30 Pacific time. Rabbi Leider regularly leads one of those sits, and Larry has led that sit. And we have a whole range of online programming. You can always check our website, et cetera, for that. But the idea there is to expand, to help cultivate and develop and expand Jewish communities of Jewish spiritual practice. And that encompasses and primarily includes congregations, but also beyond congregations, to create a nationwide or really an international community of people who are involved in Jewish spiritual practice. So that's the on one foot version, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. I want to go back to, so you were in the first rabbinic cohort, and back in the days when IJS would kind of separate out or take rabbis as a category or rabbis as a group and immerse them in this way. Now, of course, we do it with all clergy together. And one of my favorite things about this is you'll often be on retreat with clergy and not know who's a rabbi and who's a cantor. And I think there's, so again, I think that's a tribute to IJS and moving and developing. But you were in the first rabbinic cohort. Now, was that before you were a part of the staff at IJS?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. Yes. So I was a congregation. I was about to be burned out congregational rabbi. I had been at my congregation let's see, for, I don't know, about 10 years, and was attracted to it for the reason I was describing, that I felt like I was kind of so involved with programming and administration and, the nuts and bolts of synagogue life, that I had kind of lost track of, and maybe hadn't even really been so closely connected to my inner life, to my spiritual life. And I saw that the faculty, I didn't know anything about what we were going to be doing. I didn't really care. All I knew is I need some spiritual sustenance. My soul is dried up. And so I came. I didn't know we were going to be meditating. I didn't know there was going to be silence. I didn't know there was going to be yoga. I didn't know what kind of text study we were going to do. All I knew that they were great teachers and like-minded rabbis who were going to participate. And for me, it was a life changer. So also mentioned one of those teachers was Sylvia Borstein, one of your neighbors, from the Bay Area, who was the primary meditation teacher for that cohort. Was really fortunate and blessed to have that experience of having Sylvia as my meditation teacher for 4 retreats, who, along with the other teachers, have really changed my life. And to give you the nutshell version of that, I would say that until that point in my life, and I was 45 years old, I was really somebody who thought Judaism was only about judgment. Kind of hard to believe now, but I really thought that with the route to personal transformation and social change was about taking a hard line on ourselves and on each other and on society. And that had kind of ground me down. I didn't really think about Judaism as a path of love and compassion, as a way to move towards change. So what I got from IJS, and what IJS really presents, because it presents Jewish practice through the lens of mindfulness, which is really about cultivating presence and compassion, awareness, curiosity, letting go of judgment, and substituting compassion and loving kindness.
So it was about measuring up.
Yeah, it really was. It was about like being, it was really about being tough on oneself, having high standards, and basically pushing, and about discipline. Put it in terms like, in traditional Jewish terms, it was all deen, all gevura, all deen, all judgment, no chesed.
Yeah, hard. It's a hard path.
Yeah, didn't work so well. I mean, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think that I did understand that compassion was part of Jewish practice, but it wasn't really, it was certainly not something I applied to myself. And And that was really totally eye-opening for me. So my IJS experience was life-changing. So I didn't come to work at IJS until about 5 years later, when I was hired. I had left my congregation. I was doing non-congregational work, and I started working for IJS half-time, basically doing programming for Hebraiah, which is, is basically the alumni, the clergy alumni of the IJS program, which at that time was just 2 cohorts. It was about 60, 70 rabbis. Now we have over 500, 550 rabbis, cantors, and educators who've been through the program over these years.
So Mark, no meditation practice before you started? Yeah.
No.
Yeah, same with me. In fact, I would say that, I was a little bit not disdainful of it, but like when I would meet other people who meditated, I'd be like, oh yeah, oh, they meditate. Like, no, I don't do that. Right? Too much of the path of the straightforward, like the busyness of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That I couldn't really envision what it would be like to actually stop and sit. And, fair to say, probably I viewed it as a waste of time.
Yep.
When I started CLP, I was in the process of applying for or expressing interest in another intense clergy leadership program through another organization. And I came very close to pursuing that program. And, and I thank Larry for really encouraging me to look at the CLP program through IJS. And I think it was a critical moment in which I decided that I would pursue this program in lieu of the other program, which had a very different vibe. And, it's interesting because I look at you, Mark, and I think I know you as my teacher, and I know you as kind of running this program and so many others, touching people's lives. And I'm realizing how much we had in common, maybe me in 2006, 2007, and you back, a few years earlier. But I really feel that had I not found this program, I would have ended up I think I was really on the path towards being an incredible workaholic. And just that feeling of, yes, constantly measuring my life of, am I measuring up to my colleagues? Is my congregation or my congregations measuring up to what other congregations are doing, and how quickly can I get back to people, and how, keeping those high standards was, really just a big part of my rabbin. And also I think part of it is operating from a place of fear, because you're afraid you're not measuring up in all those areas, right?
Yeah.
Which it keeps you from opening up because you're afraid of not measuring up. Does that ring a bell for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because it's been a long time now. It is really hard for me to imagine or remember exactly what I was like, but I was really in my head. I lived in my head. I thought not only did I live in my head, I thought that's where you're supposed to live. And I led from my head, and I somehow sensed the limitations of that. The very first class at the very first retreat, I'll never forget this. Rabbi Jonathan Omerman was one of the teachers, one of the founders, and we were sitting there. I'll never forget this. He held up 2 index cards on which were written the Hebrew word emet. And it had an aleph, and then mem tav. And the aleph was on one index card, and the met was on the other index cards. He held them together. It said emet, which means truth. And then if you took the aleph away, you were left with met, which is death. And the aleph represents the heart, the spirit, the spirit, the soul, basically. And he took it away, and a chill went down my spine. And I had this sense of, oh, I definitely had a sense of, this is going to change your life. And I recognized the limitations of, what I had, of my nature and the nature of my rabbinic leadership until then, but not so much that, more like I'll say this, and I want to, ask you this question too, throw it back at you, which is that in some ways, kind of my childhood spirituality, which was less self-conscious, I don't know, probably would be considered, one of those weird kids who liked religious school and would sit in the sanctuary when I was a kid during the break and look out the window, and who would look at the Ner Tamid while I sat there. And, I had a very active spiritual religious life as a young kid. And then, I got embarrassed by that, or I learned to be self-conscious about that. And then I had theological problems with God as, in my 20s, etc. And I retreated into my head and lost that part of myself. And I think that was a moment of kind of coming back to that and saying there was really something essential there for me that I needed as an adult to reclaim, my inner life as a kid. I don't know. Were you like that as a kid? Did you like this stuff as a kid?
So I think for me, what happened was my attraction to Judaism in my early adult years, the intellectual draw was so great, and the permission to question and the multiplicity of answers, not to mention multiplicity of questions, right, was so powerful. But I think that can become an insatiable quest. Right? Because if you're really seeking to know everything, or to be able to answer everything, or to be able to learn everything, that it's an anxiety producing state. And especially for someone like me who learned everything Jewish as an adult, there's always that sense of, catching up, or am I going to measure up in that way? And so I think for me, I don't know if it was so much of a reclaiming from childhood as much as it was a rectifying of the path, right? That quick acceleration as an adult into that heady intellectual place. And the fact that I could learn so much, and that I loved learning so much, and I loved Hebrew, I still do, right? All those things. And so that can quickly become its own kind of elixir, I would say, that's not healthy.
How do you think it's changed? We could ask the people here, but I'm going to ask you. How do you think it's changed? You mentioned, workaholism and building in a pause and learning to be okay with not doing instead of doing constantly. So that's one thing. But how do you think, if you were a congregant at Kol Shofar observing Rabbi Leider, what changes do you think you would have noticed in her since she did CLP?
Oh, wow. Thank you for asking that question.
And then everybody can say if
everyone can weigh in and see if I was
if you got it right.
If how I did. Perhaps a little bit softer. I would say perhaps a little bit more willing to risk, although I'm sure there are some who wish I would risk more. And perhaps at times saying less. I mean, we talked about that in the meditation this morning, just by coincidence. As Mark mentioned, I lead the meditation as a part of a wonderful volunteer teacher cohort that Mark is responsible for putting together during the pandemic. And we talked about that. We talked about in the Midah, in looking at this personality trait or an approach to counting the Omer of Gevurah this morning, of translated often as strength, but it can also be translated as restraint. And so sometimes that results in speaking less. So I wonder, or I think that at times, probably not all the time, but maybe my congregation experienced that the sense of verbal expression changing, whether it's in quantity or in content. And I would also say one of the most important things would be spontaneity.
I think, I would say that too. I think part of it has to do with the mindfulness part, I think, really helps cultivate a sense of trust in oneself. It was kind of like, speaks to what you were saying earlier, when we're just in our heads, at least I'll speak for myself here too. And I also was someone for whom, a lot of Jewish literacy came as an adult, not as a kid. But always this perpetual sense of being inadequate, of not knowing enough, or being exposed for not knowing enough. Learning how to trust oneself, and more than that, to be okay with not knowing and be able to say what we don't know, which I think the mindfulness part has to do with, since it's really about letting go of knowing and opening oneself to not knowing in the moment and just being curious about it, making that a strength instead of a moral failure, not knowing, builds a sense of trust that I don't know, we'll see what happens. I'll see what comes up here. I know for me, it never got me to the point where I would get up and give a high holiday sermon extemporary, off without it all written down. But on Shabbat, it definitely helped me feel that I could get up and have a basic sense of what I was going to say, and say it, and say to myself, all right, it's not going to be perfect, and that's fine. So I guess the other thing I would throw back is also about vulnerability, and I think you model this as well from what I've seen, is that to create a spiritual community really requires creating a sense of safety for people to be vulnerable and to be willing to reveal what they struggle with and what's challenging for them. And I think that's part of it as well. And I wonder if you have sensed some of that, more of a willingness or ability to do that since starting your mindfulness practice.
Yes, and I'd love to point to a moment, because one of the great things about this conversation is we can kind of share what some of these practices look like under the microscope,
right,
through recounting what it is like to be on retreat. And I think that one of the most powerful times, it's a long time, but when we are on retreat together, we enter into silence in the evening, after our evening meal together. And then we don't speak again until the next afternoon. And I just remember this sense of incredible revelation in learning how to build that trust that you were talking about, and being vulnerable. And specifically around this is that what would happen if I really didn't know what was going on with other people, right? Didn't have any need to inquire about their well-being, to check in with them, given full permission to just basically look after my own body, my own self, to be respectful of people's space and aware physically, right? I'm not going to go and run into people or elbow them, or, that was just an amazing, and I think that is linked to being more comfortable with your own vulnerability, because when you spend hours in that place and you finally let go of, and I think that this is something about being a clergy person or being in a caring profession, is you spend an awful lot of time trying to get in other people's heads because you're trying to take care of them. You're trying to anticipate their needs. You're trying to imagine what it is. And that's good sometimes. And it's also incredibly not sustainable, right? But and we talked about this in the meditation this morning too, is that when you take a step back and you actually, it's not that you lose awareness of the other person, you just don't take responsibility for that every single minute. And then you can actually become more vulnerable and more present, which seems to be a contradiction because it feels so selfish when you do it. You think, this is terrible. I'm not looking so-and-so in the eye. I'm not, and as we learn on retreat, if someone's crying in the middle of a retreat, you don't go up and check in with them. You let them have that moment. You let them express their own needs, right? And I know the IJS stuff has their own way of checking in with people who have emotional needs. We have dedicated times of the day where we meet with mentors or with a core group.
Mhm.
But that was also just a revelation to me that one could just let go in a safe space and not have to be inside someone else's head all the time.
Yeah. I think there's a direct connection between, if we haven't said this already, I just want to restate, or either say it or restate it, that what IJS presents is an approach to Jewish mindfulness that integrates it with traditional Jewish practice, whether it's prayer, text study, mitzvot, etc. In other words, the whole range of Jewish practice, to reinvigorate it and revitalize it through a mindfulness approach that is rooted in Jewish tradition. So one aspect of that is actually, that I have learned, is to focus on one's own lived experience and to allow others to have their own lived experience. But as you just described, although one might interpret it as disinterest or disconnection, but it is possible to be present and connected to another, not by, like you said, like getting into their head, but by allowing them to have their own head or their own experience, and to have our own experience. So it's like a basic of pastoral care, like one of the principles that we practice on retreat and in general in this community of practice is no fixing, advising, or correcting, which is kind of a basic principle of pastoral care as well. I was going to actually ask you how this has shown up in your own pastoral work with your congregants, which is that, especially when people are going through challenging times, loss, illness, etc., that we can provide, we can work towards healing, if not a cure, simply by offering loving presence. Not by fixing the problem, not by analyzing it, not by explaining it, but just by bearing witness, right? Which is, basic, not just good pastoral care for clergy, but for anybody. When you go to a Shiva home and someone's had a tragic death, you don't start off by saying, "Oh, this must have happened because of whatever." Of course not. You just give a hug and you're a loving presence, and often you don't say anything. In fact, Shiva house really traditionally is almost like a silent retreat. It's supposed to be like a silent retreat, no speaking unless spoken to by the mourner who initiates it traditionally. So it's really about just bearing witness to the truth of experience and giving everyone the freedom to have their own experience of that. So I'm wondering.
I mean, look, this is
your own pastoral.
This is essentially exactly what Josh Feigelson and I talked about following the meditation this morning. And a couple of things. The other thing that it does is it gives people an opportunity to have their own journey and their own path, their own understanding, their own mourning in their own time. Right? Because it might not be in that moment, in that pastoral meeting, in that Shiva minyan, that the pieces come together for them. And if we rush to put those pieces together for them in order mostly to make ourselves feel better, or to make the world come about in a way that we so desperately crave and want, that we actually deprive the other person of, my dear friend and mentor, Rabbi Mitchell Malkus would, call it a constructivist approach. Right? Where you allow the other person to put those pieces together themselves, instead of those of us who are quick, or whether it's quick of tongue, quick of mind, or both, who are always so eager to complete people's sentences or put that together for them. And I recently had this experience as a parent, actually just yesterday, where I was so excited that one of my children made a decision that I had been hoping for. But my perception was that I restrained, that I held back from expressing my wishes, my hopes, my opinion, that she should do this. And it was such sweet news to decide to hear that she had made this decision on her own. I had already accepted in my mind that she wasn't going to do it. And I had released that. I had said, this is probably not in the cards. I think it's a missed opportunity. I'm saying this to myself, you see. I think this is a missed opportunity for her, but I had released it. And then I got this sweet, news that, decided to do X. And I was like, oh, isn't that, so I think my joy, and this is, I don't know if this is, less of a pastoral example than an interpersonal example, but it was so much sweeter than if I had persuaded her 6 or 7 days ago to do this. And plus, if she'd never decided, I had already released my desire, I guess, around wanting her to make this decision.
Right.
So it's kind of a small little microcosm of an example of the best of.
That's a great example. It's also very nice when it works out that way, right?
Well, and it often doesn't. So we hold these examples as chizuk, as strength for us. But, Mark, the other thing, I don't know if I've ever told you this, but when I was on the retreats for CLP, the 4 retreats, I really, really struggled with prayer. Mm-hmm. At the retreats. And I think, as I recall, we had to sign some kind of a waiver or something that we would be open, to creative prayer, right? But so here I was, coming from a conservative rabbinical school. And I remember sitting in services, sometimes not even participating, just listening, really struggling with, how can this be that there are these different types of prayer that are even viable, that people are doing, that speaks to them. I remember being critical of people's voice, people who are leading. And, again, what else I remember is no one was checking in with me to judge me for my own judginess. Mm-hmm. And I think I kept waiting for that. And I realized, that's not going to happen here. You're just going to be allowed to struggle with these feelings, and you're going to decide. You're going to decide.
Was that the biggest challenge for you in the
yeah, program? It was. I mean, I actually took to the meditation much more easily than I thought, but I think I really struggled with that prayer. I think from an existential place of, what does Judaism mean? Mm-hmm. Like, if we actually let go of the formal structure of prayer that I learned about in rabbinical school, that many of us learned about in rabbinical, what is the existential, what's going to happen to Judaism? What's going to happen to the Jewish people? And it sounds so funny giving voice to that, but that's really what I was going through. And I think part of it was, and I want to credit in my congregation, Steve Tulsky, who I don't know if he's on the call tonight, but he really encouraged me as one of our presidents at Shofar to really experiment with the type of prayer, especially with music. And we're going to have a whole fireside chat on the legacy of music at Shofar with Rabbi Lizzie Heidemann from Mishkan, Chicago. So leave that for another time, but to really push. And I think one of the reasons I was so unhappy sitting in services at IJS during those early retreats is because I wasn't forging ahead and trying to help my community create different types of models, that I was kind of stuck and I was bottled up. But it was through being there that I got the courage to say, I can take these elements back. I can integrate them into the essence of what prayer is here. Yes, some things will shift, some things won't shift, but they'll just be infused with some different things. Our my dear colleague and Chavruta study partner, Rabbi Alana Zeleny, great example. She's in the current cohort of the Clergy Leadership Program. She just went back to her synagogue in Richardson, Texas, and did one little experiment a couple months ago, where every time the congregation came to a Chatzi Kaddish or a Kaddish Shalem, one of the prayers that separates sections of the service from another, she just said, we're going to have a brief meditation. It's going to do the same thing. It's going to do the same thing that the Chatzi Kaddish or the Kaddish Shalom has done for thousands of years, which is to create a separation. They didn't do it every Shabbat. That wasn't the point. The point was to just try something new and to bring the congregation into an experience which they can then reflect upon and think about what they liked, what they didn't like. That's, but that's just a sweet example that she shared with me recently. So so it was a real petri dish for me to have that struggle and to come through the other side feeling a lot less threatened by just different types of prayer and what that looks like to bring it to a community. So thanks for letting me share that with you. I don't think I ever have.
No, I never heard that. And I have to say, it's having seen you lead prayer at retreats since then, it's kind of a nice surprise to hear that. It's really interesting to hear that. Yeah. So, what it makes me think about is that, just to get back to what IJS is really trying to accomplish, is sometimes we'll describe it in different ways, to recover the heart of Judaism. But in terms of what you were just describing, with that practice of substituting a short meditation for the Chatzi Kaddish or Kaddish Shalem, it has to do with addressing the why. Why do we do these things? What's the reason for these practices? And for some people, doing them for reasons of nostalgia or continuity, or just because it's the structure of ritual is comforting, that's enough, dayenu. And for many others, it's just not sufficient. There's a question about what is this trying to help me? What is this practice doing? What is this prayer meant? How is it meant to affect me? Or what is it meant to touch in me? And so finding a way to maintain the structure, not throw the structure out, but maintain the structure, but infuse it with meaning so that people experience it as meaningful and lending purpose to their lives. That's really the function of it. One of our catchphrases has always been to revitalize Jewish life. And that's really what it's about, adding some vitality and life and meaning and depth to Jewish practice. So that's a beautiful example of that.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in how you lead tefillah. So I imagine.
Well, I learned,
and that's rippled out into your congregation.
Yeah, well, I learned it from you and from other amazing teachers and colleagues, right, and peers at IJS. This morning we were reflecting, or I was bringing some of the protocols, some of the ways that we do core group, one of the listening practices that we do on retreats, and I was just reminiscing as I was preparing for tonight about all these, wonderful pithy sayings that are a part of the IJS culture. And of course, I shared it this morning because it fits into this meditation and approach to Gvura, this midah, this kind of approach that we take with counting the Omer in the second week. And that's to remember that others are not a failed version of yourself. I think that is, I'll say that again, remember that others are not a failed version of yourself. And I said this morning that I laugh and then I cry every time I say it, because I realize how many times a day I still can fall into that and do fall into that.
We read, people, when we go into these groups, every time we read that out loud for the group, even though people have heard it a million times. And I don't think I've ever heard it read without people laughing when that is said. I think I'm not sure if it's, want to ascribe it to Rabbi Nancy Flam, who I think brought it from Parker Palmer, but it's so telling. Everyone laughs because and then cries a little probably, like you said, because it exposes this assumption that we carry around that others should be like us, or vice versa, that we should be like others. That doesn't respect the distinction or the boundaries that connect and differentiate us from each other. And so the practice of respecting others' experience and allowing that to be, and letting go of control. And that's the other thing I was going to say, Susan, you were talking about, earlier about
Mm.
the workaholism, and especially for clergy, I think there is this sense of both an internal sense of needing to control and to, lead, be a leader, and the control that seems to require, and also a sense of that being expected of clergy to have control. And paradoxically, there's something about letting go of control, the way you're describing with your one of your kids, and presumably as well in congregational life, of letting go of being willing to let go of expectations or control, or being of outcomes, just doing our best and letting go of the outcome. That is a byproduct of the mindfulness practice that I think helps. It is an ingredient in resiliency and not burning out and being able to sustain oneself and say, like, it's not all about me, it's not all on me, and I can't do it by myself. That's a big relief. I don't know if you experienced that way. For me, it was a huge relief.
Absolutely. Yeah, but it's a practice, right? So I need reminding. And even as you're saying it now, I'm like, yes, thank you, Mark. Since we didn't start our day together, because you couldn't be at the meditation this morning, as I often cannot be, but it's nice to hear you say that, toward the end of our day, and definitely toward the end of your day on the East Coast. But I'm wondering if we have any questions in the chat. Maybe Adi can help us out, and if there's anybody who wants to.
I'll keep an eye out too. I do have
I
have a question while people are formulating it, which is that, and I don't know much about this. I know that there's a Center for Jewish Spirituality at Kol Shofar, but I don't know really the history of that, or how it plays out, or how you understand its role vis-a-vis the larger congregation. That is maybe.
Yes. So I'm so glad that you asked that question, Mark. And I know, I think Larry is on, I know he was on the call. I don't know if he still is.
Yeah, he's here.
Great. Okay. Cause I've got a different screen view than you do, I think. But, as so many people in our community know that Rabbi Chai Levi and Larry Yermak co-founded the Center for Jewish Spirituality here at our synagogue a number of years ago, and really brought under the umbrella of the offerings that were already a part of our congregation. And, you spoke about this earlier, Mark, when you mentioned Rabbi Levi Darby. So, really Kol Shofar has been on an IJS journey since the year 2000, right? Was that the first, right? The year of the first year of the cohort, right? And so, you really have this arc, and this is an interesting, I did a historical arc of a presentation for our board a couple of times over the last 2 years, really tracing this back and looking at how the richness of those offerings in those early years, as Rabbi Levi went on his own journey through IJS and then brought those back, and then Rabbi Chai, the same thing, participated in the Clergy Leadership Program. And then when Larry and Diane came to our congregation, and Larry's rich experience participating in the leadership of IJS, and then, my becoming a part of the Clergy Leadership Program. So it's been an amazing journey. And as Kol Shofar prepares to welcome Cantor Naomi Weiss, I hope unabashedly that she'll also participate at some point in the future with the Clergy Leadership Program. And, Mark, we're all so actively engaged. I was just speaking with one of my colleagues today of really sharing with them that this program is not only vital to the life of a congregation, but really vital to the lives of clergy leaders. I know for me, I thought it was and I still feel it was an incredible lifeline. So it is so interwoven in the life of our congregation. And I know that our board of directors is very committed to guiding the center as it comes out of COVID. As with all things in COVID, we didn't have a lot of resources left to keep everything, all the balls in the air at once. But thank you to IJS and thank you to you for all the pivoting that you did, attracting hundreds of people to a daily meditation, Monday through Friday. I mean, as you know, I've told you before, we put that out to our congregation each week in our newsletter. And we have people on this call tonight who are regulars at that. So thank you.
I know, I recognize it's really lovely. Basically, not only based on what you said, but now from what I know, you personally and the congregation are, in a sense, among the poster children for IJS in terms of what IJS has hoped to accomplish in terms of sustaining the clergy, but also providing resources that help the clergy bring that to their community. And now also, Susan, it flows both ways, that you have, offered your teaching and your services to reach, an international audience through the daily sit, and to make that connection. With the pandemic, this is something we haven't really fully explored yet, but because IJS, which once was exclusively focused on congregations, but now offers resources for a lot of unaffiliated people, I see a lot of opportunities potentially for interactions and mutual support for affiliated and non-affiliated communities. In other words, helping open the door for congregations and introducing unaffiliated Jews to congregations and communities which offer what they may not have realized is available for them.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And just also the incredible variety of all the teachers that you put together and include in these daily, it's just opens up the world for people. I mean, for me too, because I try to attend the sit as often as I can. And it's just amazing, the depth and the breadth of Torah. And the diversification of that, so that people don't think, oh, synagogues are this flavor, that, and that's not for me, but right, we're all connected. And it's just been brilliant what you've done with it. Yeah.
I somehow muted myself. I'm so used to muting myself to eliminate that.
So repeat it.
And I'm not used to not having the control. So I'm putting in the, what I said was, for me, it's been a huge blessing. Even though I've been anchored to this place for the last 2+ years in this particular spot. So I put in the chat, Deborah had a question about a good meditation book. And I threw one in. There are others as well. But this is a really good and accessible one by Rabbi Jeff Roth, Jewish Meditation Practices for Everyday Life, that I threw in there. But there are others, and maybe some folks who are here want to add their own suggestions. Of course, Alan Liu's book, Rabbi Alan Liu, Alav Shalom, his books are just brilliant, classic, and about as IJS as they get. And so they're not necessarily meditation books per se, but they are about mindfulness practice.
Absolutely.
Jewish practice. And just as Kol Shofar has developed this Center for Jewish Spirituality, there are other alums of the program in St. Louis and DC and Boston and Brooklyn and Chicago and Minneapolis and a lot of the major, and in Atlanta, where similar, within congregations, there have been similar developments of centers for Jewish mindfulness or Jewish meditation or Jewish spirituality, which is a little marker of success for IJS. But beyond that, I would say, are the intangible ways, Susan, you've described, you were affected by your experience, and have been, which filter out into the community and help change the culture, the community. The one thing I really wanted to say is that, my experience, I was a congregational rabbi for 20 years, and the synagogues often feel that they're successful if people know people's names, right? If they know who you walk in and you recognize people and you know their name, and maybe you know their kids' names, you know what they do for a living or what they did for a living. but there is a real hunger for people to be known on even deeper level, on a deeper level than that, to really have a place where they feel safe and connected and deeply known, where there's an intimacy. And that's a big challenge for our congregation, especially, larger communities. How do you develop a sense of intimacy and safety? And I really think that that's a big part of what I learned from IJS in terms of trying to inculcate that in my own communities, my own congregations when I was a congregational rabbi. And I think that's a huge piece, which is often unspoken and not necessarily articulated so well, but it's a big part of it, about the transformation of Jewish life. And, for synagogues, who knows what the future holds, because there's so much change going on right now, but
I would think that what you're describing, and actually, when I think about my legacy and departing from Kol Shofar, what I would really hope is that as much as the Center for Jewish Spirituality has unique contributions, right, to the life of our county and of the congregation, what's really even more important is the integration of those things into all of our prayer and all of our being, because we don't, especially in a community of this size, we don't want to create separate communities, or it's an illusion. It's right. And so that's something that I just look forward to, seeing how the future unfolds at Kol Shofar, and how that journey continues of integration. So
yeah. Well, I also think, sometimes people can have the mistaken impression that what this is about is meditation per se, or yoga per se, or Hasidic or Jewish mystical text study per se. But I want to tell you, can I, in the safety of our group here, can I confess something that stays within this?
Go ahead. I confessed a few things tonight, so go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So I will say that before this daily meditation on the pandemic, I did not have a daily meditation practice. And after I finished my IJS program, I didn't have a daily meditation practice, and I did not do yoga on a regular basis. I did do text study with Chavruta. However, what I realized was that, and then when I had the job at IJS, I used to check in with people. I don't know if I did this with you. I used to call the recent alumni and introduce myself and ask them about the impact of the program and what their hopes were going forward. And inevitably, I would call people, and you probably have had this experience too, where you reach out to people you haven't seen in a while as a congregational rabbi, and immediately there's immediate reaction is guilt. Oh, Rabbi, I've been meaning to get to Shul. Don't, I'll be back. Or, you haven't seen me in a while, but don't worry. And I would get the same thing from these rabbis and cantors who'd say, oh, Marc Margolius from IJS. Oh, I've been meaning to meditate. Oh, yeah, I was going to yoga, but I dropped it, but I know I got to get back there. And I would stop them and say, that's not what it's about. Don't, I would say that just that moment where you recognize, oh, I meant to do that, and I'm not doing that, and I'm judging myself, or I'm imagining you're judging me for not doing that. That awareness was the whole purpose of the program, just to have that awareness.
Right, because you have a reference. Once you've experienced it, you can barachamim tashuv, as we said, right?
Exactly.
With compassion, come back to it.
Right.
And I think too that, the days that I go, and sometimes weeks without my regular meditation practice, I know how to return to it. And it's there, it's a tool for us, right? It's like, oh, I had kind of forgotten that this might be a really good thing for me, or this will really help me. I even said, someone in my office today who's has her own meditation practice, I came in and I was preparing to lead the IJS meditation. And she said, just spontaneously, she didn't know, she just said, today was a really important day for me to meditate. So I went into her office after and said, oh, you know what? I actually was leading meditation today, but sometimes it's good to meditate more than once a day, because there are just days you really need it.
Yeah.
And we had a good laugh, and it was so true.
It really is. But, I guess, partly for me, the point of that is you don't need to be, and like, far be it from me. Meditation is a good thing. Regular daily meditation is an even better thing. But you do not need to meditate or be a meditator to practice Jewish mindfulness. All you need to do is in that moment, pay attention and wake up and be aware. That was my takeaway from IJS. And I love that. I love that. And it applies to everything. So some of the folks, some folks here might be very active in your Center for Jewish Spirituality or in the meditation, and some may not be. And my hope is that the people who are not necessarily still say, oh, I see where this is showing up in the life of my community, through all the rabbis who have been through Kol Shofar, and what they have brought, and what I, congregant, have appreciated about them and about Rabbi Leider. I see that it has really changed my life. So, Susan, I know we're coming to the end. I just want to say, like, I imagine that, the people who are here tonight, or, this afternoon for you folks, and the people who will be on subsequent fireside chats, and the people who no doubt are writing to you, or, connecting with you, or having coffee with you, or calling you, know that their lives have been changed for the better because of you, knowing you personally, and of your leadership. And if IJS have anything to do with that, we are really honored and glad to have played a role in that.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you to the wonderful community members who joined us tonight, and thank you to Adi and to Kirk for guiding us, and also making sure that it was recorded tonight so that we can share it with others as well. So, Mark, again, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for being with me and with us tonight. Thank you.
As they say, besimcha. It was really a joy to do this with you, Susan. Thank you so much. And, may you go from strength to strength, for, enjoy and celebrate the close of this chapter and the opening of a new chapter in the next, for you in your life, and personally and professionally.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you to everyone. Lila Tov, good night.